Hi, and welcome to another edition of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, Jon Fetherston. On today's episode, we're going to be looking into the mess known as Massachusetts. We're joined by Jess Machado, a Fall River reporter. I think you're going to be real interested in hear what she has to say. And Alice Shattuck, the better part of the Burn Barrel podcast, I would tell you. And we're going to talk about some local issues that are impacting Massachusetts as well. So, ladies, welcome. Thanks for joining us here at All Politics and Local.
Thanks, Jon. Thanks for having us.
So, Jess, you have been working very hard on what I refer to as the Healy hotels and working on some stories in the Healy hotels. One, you've exposed the cost of just what a Lyft and Uber drivers are costing the taxpayers. But you have a piece coming out today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your piece coming out today?
Right from the start, I've been pretty fascinated with, the life cycle of a migrant in Massachusetts, so to speak. From the first time that we had these migrants dropped off in Martha's Vineyard, I've just been so curious as to what happens to them. So my, curiosity about what goes on in these hotels has really never stopped. I've spent a lot of time looking at the hotel closest to me, which is in Taunton, which it's, completely, filled with migrants. It's closed to the public. And through that reporting, I've been able to connect with a lot of different people who are staying in shelters throughout the state. The story today is really going to be the first inside look on what is inside these hotels. We hear a lot about them. We're spending billions of dollars on these migrants, but I don't know if anybody has actually been able to see an actual inside room of these hotels. Certainly not since that very first fluff piece that I saw out there, showing people come in and everything looks great. The reality is it's almost 2 years later. These hotels are run down. They are infested with insects and rats and mice. And there's a real health issue going on. And we were talking about this is really not a private building anymore, is it? It's a taxpayer funded public housing, and whether or not these hotels are actually being taken care of, I think is a question people need to ask. And I think there's some health issues that are a real concern. So I was able to investigate this one location. I have someone on the inside that sent me some photos. They're pretty concerning, whether it's, mice chewing through baseboards, eating through clothing, infestation of roaches and other insects. It's pretty concerning. So today we're going to drop that story and then get some more inside information about what it's actually to live inside one of these shelters.
Well, I'm going to find that fascinating because as a migrant shelter director and a former chairman of my local board of health, I can tell you that, you don't want anybody to live this way, and that's where I get confused is that, people are saying, well, the governor's doing this because you're being nice to people. Is this a way to be nice to people? I question that. This is not a way to be nice to people. And if you're going to invite people to America, you have to treat them like, you would treat other Americans, and your local board of health would not put up with this in a local housing authority. Your local board of health would not put up with this in a restaurant. They certainly wouldn't put it up with it in a school. So why is it being put up with in a local hotel? I mean, Alice, you as a parent with kids in school, I mean, what are your concerns of when you hear stuff like this in Massachusetts?
I mean, it's extremely concerning, and it's concerning for the welfare of the children who are in these hotels. My heart breaks for them. And I mean, of course, the costs are a huge factor, but the more that we're putting people up in hotels where there are huge sanitary problems, the more it imposes costs on other parts of our government, as well as being completely unconscionable for how we're treating people who are coming into our community. These are places where the school district has to make things up because students aren't being fed properly. They're not being clothed properly. We have, students coming into the school district with much deeper needs in terms of language learning because we're bringing people into the community and not providing for their ability to actually thrive in the communities. So it's a real question, where does the funding from this come from? And if we don't have the funding to do this properly, if we only have the funding to put people in roach-infested, rodent-infested, terrible conditions where we're not feeding and clothing people properly, why are we doing it then? If the point is to be kind, if the point is to welcome people into our communities, it doesn't seem like we're doing a very good job at that right now.
I think you bring up a valid point, Alice. I mean, okay, I think that if you agree or disagree with the whole premise of it, the premise was is that you wanted to help these people. You have to admit sometimes that you're not able to do something. And it's self-evident now that the state is not prepared to do this. So why is Maura Healey reluctant to admit that she needs either number needs help, or two, that they're not qualified to do it? But then she's going to double down and say she's going to do everything in her power to protect the bad people, which is a very, very, very small percentage of people living in these hotels. But she's going to do everything that she can to protect those people rather than just do basic blocking and tackling here. Like, are these places clean and sanitized? So what else are you hearing, Jess?
Well, I mean, we have to really step back and think about this. Just because it's been going on this long doesn't mean that it should have been. Living in hotels or families living in small rooms is not a really healthy way of life. First of all, we've heard in the beginning, and I think these stories has fallen off a little bit, but you're living in a hotel room. We've all been in one, right? How is this a reasonable expectation of living for a year or a year and a half for a family of, say, four? It's not. You're not supposed to be cooking inside these locations. I am hearing that there was such a concern about sanitary issues regarding food and the preparation of food that they actually removed all of the microwaves from each one of the rooms at this location and then put them in a central location. So people were being forced to move food back and forth between a central location in the rooms. Think about the size of these locations. Just the Taunton Hotel, for example, they have 140 rooms there. So I think it wasn't planned out. People living in a hotel is a temporary solution. This is a long-term problem. We've been dealing this for over a year and a half right now. And eviction notices are coming, right? So I have people on the inside of these hotels that have been served their 90-day notice. Then they're down to the 60 and 30 days. Where are they going after this? What's the plan? Down here in Bristol County, John, I'm telling you right now, apartments are hard to come by. And when you find them, they're astronomically priced. Home base is obviously an option to these people. I'm just not sure what the plan is to transition these people out of hotels into affordable living.
Well, a lot of people talk about home base and you hear the numbers and you're like, what? You're going to subsidize people's rents for 2 years up to $30,000. So essentially $1,500 a month. And it sounds great. And the landlords say, well, okay, maybe I'll think about it. But what I'm hearing on the street as a housing commissioner uh, is that a lot of these landlords who took that initial leap and said, hey, I'll take that $1,500 a month supplemental. I'll release an apartment to a family of four that is now turned into a family of nine. And I'm only getting the 1,500. I'm not getting the other $1,000 a month that, the rent really is, because it's really 2,500. And I can't evict anybody for not paying their rent because I do receive a partial payment. So even the landlords have been burned on this because they're not getting what they were told. I'm told that either the payments are delayed or they're not getting them. And the bigger issue is that more people are living in these apartments that are on the lease as well, too. So, and then you backtrack to June of 2023. The goal was to find everybody permanent housing within 9 months. I personally know of people that are still in shelter from June of 2023. One, they're not working, and two, they have no prospects on getting a place. So is Governor Healy going to evict these poor people in January into the cold? I can't see that being an option either. So it's a lot of words, but I don't see a lot of reality. I mean, what do you ladies think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all know, living in Massachusetts, the cost of housing and how difficult it is to find and maintain housing in this state. Especially, with the current economy, people are really, really struggling, and the cost of housing have only gone up. Mortgage rates are high, rents are high, and I can't imagine how challenging it would be to come to this state, not know the language, to not have a place to live, to not have a job lined up, and then expect to be able to support a family on the kind of wages you can get in an entry-level position, not knowing English. It's an unrealistic expectation, and we've put, at a federal level, at a state level, we've put that unrealistic expectation towards people to say, come here and everything is going to work out just great. And then the only response has been to put the taxpayer on the hook when there's obviously not the opportunities that we're selling to these people on the brochure, who are just coming here thinking that they're going to get a better lives for themselves, and they're being put up in a crazy, infested, terrible conditions and have no other way to provide for their family. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the taxpayers of Massachusetts.
Speaking of taxpayers in Massachusetts, Jess, you wrote an article you did a public records request on what the cost of just the one hotel that you're focusing in on is paying for Uber and Lyft rides. Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I like to pick apart this like massive bill that taxpayers are footing and really try to break it down into like I guess a way that we can easily digest it, right? So talk to us about these numbers. And I actually went to the hotel and I was there trying to get some information. And while I was there, John, it was just an endless, carousel of Ubers and vans coming up and picking people up. And by asking questions, I learned some people were going to doctor's appointments. Some people were going to see attorneys about their immigration status. Some people were going grocery shopping, and it was all taxpayer funded transportation. So I put in a FOIA request, and I asked for the copies of the two contracts that this hotel has with the state. So there were two different ones. One was actually already participating in emergency services for the state. So they had a long-standing relationship by providing transportation for other emergencies. The other was a new addition. So that first contract was just adjusted. So they had an original contract, which was very minimal in how much they were spending, the state was spending with them. Obviously, it ballooned up to cover what was going on at the Taunton Hotel. And then they added the second one. And from the public records request, they basically outlined that it was, between $7 and $8 million in transportation costs for this one location.
So let's assume it's 8 million for the other 75 shelters that we have. What is that? What is 8 million times 75? That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of taxpayer dollars being distributed to people. And I want to just go back a bit, if you don't mind, John, to what Alice was saying about these, locations and what we're providing. I have met through these stories Massachusetts residents who are homeless, and their needs are not being met, and single moms who are struggling, who have fallen on hard times with no judgment, right? However they got to this place, that are not being helped. And that is the most frustrating part for me, is to see people who have been born here in Massachusetts, who have, at some point contributed to the tax base, and who are falling on hard times in this economy. And they can't get ahead. And now they're in these hotels, and they're forced to deal with these conditions. But not only that, there's no future for them to leave. There is no public housing. There are no projects like there were back in the 80s and 90s, John, where, people who were on welfare were all living in these projects within each city. Those are full. There's no housing available. So meeting these people and talking to them about their story, I get what's going on with these migrants, but, are we able to even at all take on people when we haven't met the needs of the people who live here first? And I think those stories need to be told. And unfortunately, these people feel, from the ones that I've spoken to, they don't want to jeopardize any of the help that they're currently getting. So they don't want to speak up about the conditions in the hotels because they don't want to be told they have to leave. And, I'm fortunate to have been able to build relationships with some of them and hear their stories that, I'm going to be sharing, but it's, we're leaving Massachusetts residents behind in the process of trying to take care of people who have come from outside our state.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, and I defer to my experience as a Massachusetts housing commissioner. I'm a housing commissioner still today. Most housing authorities were built, as to your point, if you were lucky, right after World War II or during the Vietnam era. So one, they're old, but the state does a pretty good job of upkeeping them. But they're not built for families. They're built for maybe two people at best. So the option of placing migrant families, taking them from the hotels and putting them into the housing authorities might sound like a temporary plan until you bring in the piece that Alice was saying about the education piece. You now, where the hotels are, they're in established cities and school systems. But if you start nickel and diamond and putting, 10 kids in this school system, another 15 kids in this school system, you're going to have a domino effect that's going to affect public education and public safety that nobody is thinking about. So
in Somerset, we had migrants that were brought here overnight, literally in the middle of the night, in 2023. And those students were integrated into our school system. And then 3 months later, they were all moved. The families were moved to the Taunton Hotel. But under the McKinney-Vento Act, families were given the option to let their children stay in the school district where they originated. And some families chose to do that. We have 9 students that chose to do that. So 9 children still get educated in the Somerset School District, but they live in Taunton. And we, taxpayers, foot the bill for the transportation for that bus every day to bring them back and forth. And John, I recently was told that we actually also pay for transportation for the parents to come to Somerset for back to school night or parent teacher conferences. We're footing the bill for that as well. And I'm going to tell you something. I remember back in the day when I was a new mom, I had a family and we had one car between my husband and I, and he would take it to work in the morning, or else I'd have to get the kids up and drag them all out at 5 a.m. And if I needed to get to my kids' school, I'd either have to try to find a ride or I would walk. I could never today in the town that I live in, call my school and say, listen, I've got to get to parent teacher conferences. Can you guys send a bus for me? It's just not, it doesn't happen. Yet we're footing the bill for people who have been dropped here by the Biden administration. And in a way, I'm paying for that now, which is really crazy to think about.
I don't even know how we got to where we're at. Sticking on the topic of schools, Alice, you recently received a letter home from your school about your kids. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think I share the frustrations of lots of parents about how the school districts don't teach, the fundamentals anymore, the basics. It's all distraction and DEI and every new trend that comes along. They're all about that. But I was so excited because this school year, they finally, in their English class, are teaching for the first time, I think, what I consider to be one of the classics of the canon of literature that we all know, which is All Quiet on the Western Front. They just started the unit on it. My daughter's really excited. It's very gripping. I mean, if all you've read is adapted and YA novels in school, I think the last book they read was written all in blank verse and was about basketball. And she was not thrilled by that, but she was excited. It's an incredible novel. There's a reason that it's stuck around for, the century that it has. And, but our school district, of course, immediately felt the need to apologize for exposing the children to this dangerous, dangerous novel. They sent home this letter this month. Dear parents and guardians, as you are aware, your 8th grader will be reading All Quiet on the Western Front as a part of our curriculum. It follows the experiences of German soldiers fighting in World War I, and some of the content is quite violent and explicit. There is swearing in the novel beyond a typical young adult literature. In addition, we have the students skipping certain sections of the book that are clearly inappropriate for middle school students, but that doesn't mean that students might not read those pages on their own. We will approach the novel's content with sensitivity, not focusing too heavily on the violence or the swearing. We will complete an end-of-module task that requires them to write an essay about the psychological aspects of war, and that will be the ultimate focus of instruction for this unit. We would also like students to advocate for themselves if they have concerns while reading the novel. Finally, as you may or may not be aware, this is my favorite part, there is a modern movie of All Quiet on the Western Front on Netflix. We have not seen it, but we have read that it is very violent and gruesome. We are not recommending that students watch this movie. Please contact your English teacher if you have further questions or concerns. And immediately I thought, way to take all the fun and excitement out of the first time you have students read a real book. Especially, I think boys so often get left behind in our school district. I have 1 daughter and 4 sons, and very often English class is a place where boys struggle. And finally giving them a book that has a lot of great content for boys. I know my boys are very into World War II stories, disaster stories. They love like reading about the Titanic and other things like that. So a lot of exciting content for them, and a story that's focused really on teen boys. That's something that would be of so much interest to them. And it's so apparent to me how the school feels about this is really just that they immediately feel the need to jump right out and apologize. Like, we're so sorry that we're exposing you. Probably the kids in All Quiet on the Western Front are pretty close to the ages of the kids they have reading it. So just a bit of a current state of the school system snapshot there on that one.
But I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I mean, kids are exposed to stuff today that none of us as middle school age children were ever exposed to. I mean, TikTok and YouTube, and we can't live in. I'm not saying that you should encourage, your kids to watch violent videos and everything like that, but they see it, they hear the language now. I think it's abhorrent that they do, but they do. That's the world that we live in now. And the fact that the school would apologize for reading a classic book, I think it tells you a lot about the times that we're in.
Right, and it shows a misunderstanding of the work as well, because the novel is fundamentally an anti-war, anti-violence novel. So to approach it with that mindset of this book is somehow dangerous and scary is really missing the point of the entire exercise.
Unbelievable. Jess, any comments as a parent as well? I mean, what would your reaction be? Get that letter home from school?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be on the tail end of the public school system in this state. I've had four children go through it. My oldest graduated in 2019, right? And I'm just going to say this. Parents have to work so hard to make sure what they think is appropriate is actually adopted by the school district. I would recommend to anybody, stay involved, watch your school committee meetings, and more than anything, try to get some people on your local school committees. That is really where a lot of these things are happening. Liberal, far left teachers or former teachers are getting on these school committees, and they are really cultivating and crafting the curriculum and the style of the school district. School committees work for you. And they should represent you. And you need to get some people on these local school committees. And listen, we had a state rep who was for 20 years, a Democratic state rep in our district, and she started on the school committee. That's where she started, and she was able to parlay that into a very effective left-leaning run as a state representative. So listen, every day I would cringe at what was going on in our school districts, from the smallest to the biggest of things. And it's very hard as a parent because you don't want the teachers or the school to take it out on your kids when you're voicing your concern or opinion for how things go. My take on that is get somebody in a seat that can advocate for you and your family. At a minimum, get one person on your school board so that they can kind of be the watchdog for everybody else.
I've always been the champion of you can have a liberal agenda and you can have a different opinion, but government only works when there's checks and balances. And if apathy has taken over your school system or your local city council or select board because you just don't want to get involved, then that person who looks back at you in the mirror tomorrow morning, that's the person to blame. Because if you're not going to step up and serve on a local board or a local committee, then you really can't complain about it because, like I always say, you need the checks and balances, and that's how effective government works.
Absolutely, and to Jess's point about being on school committees and then rising to higher levels in politics, it really does matter. When we first lived in Melrose, Massachusetts, on our local school committee was Catherine Clark. And she went on to become a state rep and a state senator. And she is now in Congress, and she's one of the most powerful women in the United States. She has a leadership role in Congress, and we hear about her all the time. She is driving the left-wing policy agenda nationally, and she started out on a local school committee.
Yep, that's an excellent point. Jess, let's talk a little bit about another story that you talked about, Blue Hub, and how it involves the governor. I think people are going to be shocked about this one.
Yeah, so you know how this story came about, John, is my boss gets the State House News Service updates, and there was a protester that showed up at a Maura Healey event, not related to housing. And the person was screaming from the audience that she was putting provisions in her latest economic development bill to protect Blue Hub. and this person was kind of screaming and was removed. And it kind of made us pause and say, what's got this person so angry, and what is Blue Hub? And I've spent more time researching and reading about this nonprofit over the past month than any other story. It's truly fascinating. So essentially, the company is a nonprofit that is supposed to help people get out of situations where their home is being foreclosed upon. And over the past decade or so, they claim to have helped over 990 families save their homes. What they do is they go in and they buy the home from either the homeowner in a short sale or from the bank that's foreclosing, and then they resell it to the homeowner. The interest rates are higher than average when they resell. They also make money on that one transaction. So the day that they buy it from the bank or they buy it from the homeowner, they resell it to the family with a profit. I've seen a profit as high as $100,000 on a one-day sale or transaction. But essentially what happens is these people are in these transactions and they are going to be giving Blue Hub a certain percentage of the value that increases on this property. And some people are saying, okay, so great, you're in a tough jam, you're behind on your mortgage, there aren't people knocking down doors to come and help you save your home. It's kind of a righteous thing that they're doing. Well, what happens is they get locked into these mortgages, and say these people get back on their feet, right? And in 2 years, they've, changed their income and their credit is better. They want to refinance and they want to get into a lower rate. They have to pay out that appreciation equity to Blue Hub before they do that. And that is the problem.
How
So
can you do
let's
that?
just say a property, goes up, 75 or $100,000, right? By the time they refinance, Blue Hub may have 50% of that equity coming to them. The family has to pay that out to Blue Hub before they can refinance with a new bank. It would actually defeat the purpose of refinancing or saving money on the interest rate, because now they have this balloon payment that they have to pay Blue Hub. So it's predatory lending practices. The lawsuit that currently is in place with Blue Hub has families basically saying they weren't aware of this. The fine print was really fine print. These closings went very quickly and that they weren't properly informed. The bigger picture here, Jon, is the CEO of Blue Hub is Elise Sherry. She is a longtime supporter of Maura Healey. She has not only donated personally to her campaigns, but she is also a huge fundraiser for Maura Healey and Democrats across the state. A lot of people are saying that this provision that was put in this economic development bill, which basically will not allow Blue Hub to ever be taken to court or have any litigation against them for their lending practices going forward, is basically a sweetheart deal for Maura Healey's bestie, who, by the way, earned over $1 million last year from her company.
So essentially, this is, you see them a lot more down south than you do up here in the Northeast, but it's, payday lending type of, it's predatory lending. I think the way that you described it. Wow. That's a huge story. That is a huge, huge story.
The stories of the families are really unfortunate and sad. And some people, who have joined this lawsuit have expressed, what has happened to them. One of the families owned a property that was in Revere, and they went to sell their property to the Encore Wind Company that was making way for the casino. And they actually had to pay Blue Hub $314,000. So here's this family coming in getting a huge payday. They're finally going to get this money. Wynn is going to pay them $800,000 for this property, and they had to give Blue Hub $300,000. To me, that just defeats the purpose of a nonprofit coming in and trying to help a family. They made so much money off of this one family because they had to get that equity appreciation. It's wild.
It's unbelievable. Alice, you had a comment?
It's so disappointing because, so many people are in these tight spaces now with the economy the way it's been for years since COVID. People have struggled, and sometimes it feels like in this state, everybody else comes first. The donors come first, the migrants come first, anybody who has a relationship with Maura Healey comes first, and that the people who are struggling and are having trouble affording their houses, that they're the people who come last, and it's always those people that end up stuck with the bill. Everybody else finds a way to make big money, whether it's off of the pandemic or off of housing migrants or whatever it is, that the Democratic Party in the state a lot of times tries to make a case that they're for the little guy, but really they're for their corporate buddies. And that's what you see over and over again with stories like this. And when it does touch on something so personal and devastating as losing your family home, for example, it's especially sad to see profiteers making money off it and keeping politicians in power while people are really suffering and struggling.
Ladies, I thank you for joining us today. The only thing that we don't have a lot of around here is time on All Politics is Local. Alice, why don't you tell people how they can connect with your podcast and your social handles?
Sure. So our podcast is the Burn Barrel Podcast. I host it with my husband, Tom Shattuck, who's a radio host. And we do that daily, 5 days a week. You can find it on any podcast platform, the Burn Barrel Podcast, or at burnbarrelpodcast.com, on Twitter at burnbarrelpod.
Thank you, Alice. And Jess Machado, plug your socials and how people can read some of your great articles.
Thank you, John. I write for Fall River Reporter, and you can find us at fallriverreporter.com. We have a sister publication, which is New Bedford Guide. You can find them at newbedfordguide.com. I'm on X at Jess Machado Show. You can find me there. I link all my articles. Today's article that's dropping will be on there. And the Fall River Reporter X account, which is at Fall River Report, not Reporter. And we're on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram and TikTok.
Great, thank you. I want to thank you again, both of you. Merry Christmas to the both of you. Merry Christmas to the viewing audience. And you're watching All Politics is Local, and we'll talk again real soon.